Hi, beautiful people. Welcome back to the NC channel. If you're new to this channel, hope you stick around. It was one of those slow days at work. These days rarely happened, and when they did, I had absolutely no idea what to do with myself at my desk. On this particular slow day, after browsing through a couple of sites, I went onto one of a popular low-cost airline and clicked on the low fares promo. I found a flight to Stockholm. The round trip cost an equivalent of £20. I was so excited. I messaged my friends about this deal flight, and to my surprise, none of them were interested in visiting Stockholm. I did a quick lookup of Stockholm, and it seemed like a place where one could see most of it during a short stay, and it looked like a nice place also. Also, I had a Swedish classmate in uni, and he was a pretty decent stand up guy. After repitching the trip to my friends and still having no one interested, I decided to book the flights anyway. Worst case, I'll go alone, I thought to myself. Weeks later, I had pretty much forgotten about the booking until a friend asked. She still wasn't interested anyway. She said something about the fact that the city was an expensive place to be in and the prices of the plane tickets had significantly increased. I still wasn't dissuaded from going, especially as I needed a break from work and the city I lived in. I had never been anywhere by myself, so it was going to be my first solo trip. I was going to be able to do whatever I wanted without considering the feelings or the interests of anyone else, and I was going to rediscover myself. The rediscovering myself part came from me looking up benefits of traveling alone on Google. So I really didn't think about this when I was buying the tickets. I landed in an airport just on the outskirts of Stockholm and took the bus into the city and then a train to Yarna. On my way to the Airbnb, I got lost a couple of times because the map I had downloaded just wasn't working and I ended up walking around in circles. I gave up and sat down miserable in one of the little restaurants with outdoor seating and ordered hot dogs, which tasted so weird, and I tossed it into the bin. To make matters worse, my phone, also acting as my rather useless navigation system, died on me. Great! Effing great! It hadn't even dawned on me that time that I really wasn't in Stockholm, at least not in the city itself. About an hour later, I met a friendly couple who gave me the proper directions, and 15 minutes later, I was at the proper address and could see the apartment in front of me. The host was a really nice, elderly hippie woman. She had dreads and all that. She was having a cigarette, coffee, and her cat was playing somewhere around her. She waved me over and waited for me to get into her flat. I eyed the mount of freshly smoked cigarette butts and her cats with a lot of apprehension. She clearly hadn't written that she smoked, but how had I missed the fact that she had cats? I had been terrified since I was a child. I started to play the piano at the age of 8, and my piano teacher had a zillion cats that liked to hiss, scratch surfaces, and meow. I was always so terrified to go for my lessons as a child. Back to present, I sucked it up and thought I was going to be able to avoid the cat. She saw me eyeing the cat and told me that the cat was antisocial and would leave me alone. She mentioned that none of her guests were ever bothered by the cat and barely noticed its presence. That said, I wasn't to let the cat out of the flat. I was somewhat relieved by the news. She went out and left me to pack and unwind. I crawled into the bed, and the cat that had been watching me jumped right into the bed with me. I screamed in fear and flew out of the bed. The cat watched me and then jumped right out to rub its body against my ankles. I stood paralyzed in fear. I went to use the bathroom. The cat followed. Then I decided to run out into the balcony, thinking that if the cat followed me, I would lock it out there. The so-called antisocial cat followed me, and then I ran inside, closing the door quickly. That was when I knew the cats were slick and fast. Weird thing was that throughout my stay, the cat never followed its owner. And not only did it follow me, it was goddamn curious about whatever I was doing. It would jump onto the kitchen countertops when I was cooking. It would jump into my suitcase whenever I opened it. And it seemed to think that my bed was for the two of us at night. Even the owner kept saying that she was confused that her cat was tailgating me, because it never seemed to like to be around people. She asked me to pick up the cat and fling it hard out of my bed if it got in. I had tried this once, and the body just seemed to grow longer when I held it, and I shrieked and dropped it and never tried to lift it up again. Now, this story isn't about the cat, but needless to say, I was less freaked out and scared of the cat by the time I was leaving. I even stroked it a few times and it purred loudly. Now, back to sightseeing in Stockholm. I had booked a free walking tour. I find this the easiest and affordable way to take in all the major sites and learn the history behind them in an organized way. The tour guides are usually so knowledgeable and the tours are usually relaxed, but at the same time, like I said, informative. However, the tour guide in Stockholm wasn't. She may have been knowledgeable, but on that day, probably did not feel like sharing her knowledge. She just wanted to complain about the Swedes and her ex-boyfriend. I took it that it was a recent breakup, but she already seemed to have another, so the timelines were a bit confusing, or maybe she just couldn't let go. And she wanted to make fun and gossip about other tour guides we ran into. She barely gave the background into any of the places we were visiting. I honestly considered deflecting. A lot of people whispered about doing this as well, and some actually did. And, of course, she talked shit about the people who left. I figured that I would just stay and use her as my navigation around town. Aside from seeing the sights, I learned more about her ex and the other tour guides we came across than the actual places we visited. I had to sign up for another walking tour with another company. In Stockholm, I saw the Royal Palace, the Iron Boy, which is the smallest statue in Stockholm, the Stockholm Cathedral, where I saw the statue of St. George and the Dragon, a rune stone, and the Citizen Square, which is one of the largest squares in Stockholm. I walked along the longest street in Stockholm. I also visited the Katarina Church, which is one of the major churches in central Stockholm. The church had been rebuilt twice after being destroyed by fires. In the evening, I took a walk on the walking path, which had a magnificent view of Lake Mälaren, the Stockholm City Hall, and Riddarholmen. I also visited the Vasa Museum, where you find one of the warships from, I think, 1628, and then went to the ABBA Museum as well. To be honest, I had no idea that ABBA was from Sweden, Stockholm to be precise, until I was there. I also learned about how Sweden imported a new king from France after the death of their king, and they desperately needed someone urgently with military prowess to fill the role. I learned the origins of the term Stockholm Syndrome. Funny thing was that I did not realize it was coined as a term which was due to something, a kidnapping that had happened in Stockholm, and also found out that they were Swedish Vikings. It was almost hard to imagine that this country once had Vikings. Don't ask me why. And then life in Sweden, the quality of life, taxes, and reasons why there are so many men out pushing prams alone and taking leisure walks. The previous not so happy in Sweden tour guide had recommended a place to try Swedish food. Since she had been talking shit throughout her tour, and this seemed to be one of the few things that she actually liked, I decided to give the place a try. Oh boy, I was so happy I did. It was a family owned restaurant and it had a nice atmosphere. I had Swedish meatballs with mashed potatoes, cranberries, and pickles. I also had lingonberry juice and salad to go with it. With every bite, my tongue went through a series of tongasms. Well, I know that's not a word, but I'm sticking to the word. And my throat happily sent the food to my belly. Those are the best meatballs I have ever had in my life till date. Just thinking about it makes me salivate. Talk about amazing food. Of course, I also had to indulge in some fika afterwards. And I became a regular fika indulger. Also, not a real word. I also took day boat trips to some archipelagos like Vauxhall and to see the Drottningholm Palace, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. On some days, I just wandered around the city. Since I stayed in Yana, I got a train pass, which worked for the buses as well, and so just got into whatever bus and had a private bus tour. Oh, by the way, I would advise anyone visiting Stockholm to stay in Stockholm itself. Don't be cheap. Don't be like me. Contrary to what I heard from the tour guide, I found people to be extremely respectful, polite, and helpful. Once, I asked a policeman for directions. He rattled off the directions in English, but the names of the places he called were in Swedish, and so I really didn't understand the directions. Seeing that, he and his colleague took me to the train station and onto the right platform and bade me goodbye. Talk about being nice. In Stockholm, I even once saw the controllers come into the train asking for tickets. They went like,
Hello, would you like to show me your ticket, please?
I wondered what would have happened if I had said no. Luckily, but not really luckily, but you know what I mean. The scenario I was curious about happened right in front of me. There was a man with a family who didn't have a ticket, and I watched as they politely explained to him train tickets and the fines for not having one. He pretended to neither understand English nor Swedish. They even offered that he got off at the next stop to get a ticket. However, his son quickly interjected in English that they had two more stops to go and not one. If only looks could kill, he would have died from the glare his father shot him. They all got out at the next stop. I thoroughly enjoyed my stay in Stockholm. Around the city, there were so many places to sit and relax and just enjoy the green scenery. I also had fun recycling stuff as I got money back for bringing in bottles and stuff. I can still happily say that my first solo trip was a success. I heartily recommend Stockholm for anyone looking for a short trip in Europe. Even though I had stayed longer, 3 days in Stockholm will be sufficient to visit the city and even some of its surroundings. Knock, knock. Still here? Thank you so much for staying all the way to the end. If you have any tips to share or any comments to make, please do so in the comment section below. If you have enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe.